Okay, let's get started. Pam.
Good morning. Before you this morning, the first item you have is the sectional map amendment for the Mark Rails Community Sector Plan. The Council approved the sector plan on February 7th of this year, and then submitted on July 31st was the sectional map amendment, which implements the recommendations in the approved and adopted plan. A public hearing on the sectional map amendment was held on October 15th. You heard testimony from three individuals, the chair of the planning board, president of the Germantown Historical Society, and the Boyd Civic Association president. They were all in support of the plan and the SMA. In written testimony, council also received information from three different property owners, two in support, and one which is the topic of conversation today, which was one property owner at 19515 Waters Road who has written with a concern about the proposed downzoning of that property. The sector plan recommended zoning, it's a property within Site 15 of the plan. The sector plan recommended zoning for that site is a CRT zone with a total FAR of 0.75, 0.75 of commercial, 0.75 of residential, and a height of 60 feet. The current zoning on that property is a CRT with a total FAR of 1.0, commercial of 0.5, residential of 0.75, and a height of 65 feet. So the SMA recommended zoning reduces the total FAR from 1 to 0.75 and reduces the height from 65 feet to 60. To date, it has been council practice not to change zoning that has been recommended in an approved and adopted plan. However, unless new information comes to light between the adoption of the SMA and the adoption of the plan. And in this case, we were contacted by the property owner for parcel 915, which is the subject of our conversation today, in which we learned that this property owner had dedicated land and put an easement on his property for that significant road improvement where there is now a connection from Waters Road onto Germantown 118. And in doing so, engaged in this interaction with the county with a certain zoning and height, which is the current zoning and height on the property. And so is concerned with having it slightly down zoned.
So he participated in a project that he spent money on.
Absolutely.
Based on being able to use property in accordance with his existing development rights.
Exactly, existing zoning. And so what staff is recommending today is that this property, and actually all of Site 15, but you can confer with planning staff, retains the total FAR of 1 and has the mix of C of 0.75, R of 0.75, and returns the height to 65 from the recommended 60. So from current zoning, it is very little change. It is actually just slightly allowing more commercial density in that mix of uses.
Okay, any comments on this from the planning staff?
Good morning, gentlemen. Fred Boyd from the Area 3 Planning Team. Your staff's proposed changes to the ordinance are satisfactory to us under the circumstances. But we endorse the idea that if you are going to alter the zoning for this piece of property, that it be altered for the entirety of that analysis area.
Okay. That makes sense as well.
Agree.
Mr. Friedson and I are in agreement. Thank you for your work. Appreciate this.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for making it very clear. And we'll move on to the next item. That was quick, I know. I hope it wasn't too quick. You wanted to draw it out and savor the moment, or? Okay.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. All right. Good morning, gentlemen. Hi, Christine.
Good morning.
Good morning. All right, let's return to this conversation.
Great. Okay, so am I on here? Okay. Good morning. Before you is item number 2 for the committee, Council Bill 24-19, air conditioning and rental housing. And as you know, the bill would require a landlord to provide and maintain air conditioning service for rental housing located in the county during certain months of the year. A number of issues were discussed at the initial work session that this committee held on September 23rd. And a number of those issues probably warrant some additional discussion and consideration by the committee. I wanted, if you don't mind, to bring your attention first to circles 14 and 15 of the staff packet, which includes clarifying amendments recommended by staff.
Okay.
And I want to point out that this is essentially a template. There might be a few things that you may or may not want to vary within these amendments, but I think it's an important place to start because during the last work session, some of the main issues were, which rooms are going to be subject to the air conditioning requirement, and also what happens when somebody can control their air conditioning versus when there's central air conditioning that can't be controlled by unit. So these amendments, well, the first couple amendments are simply technical amendments recommended by the County Attorney's Office. The next set of amendments were developed based on input from DHCA, and they more or less mirror the format of the heating amendments. And so you have a distinction between where the cooling is not under the control of the tenant. There has to be a required temperature of no more than 80 degrees Fahrenheit. That's, of course, something the committee could vote to change that temperature requirement if you wish. And then importantly, this would apply to each habitable space, excluding kitchens. And then it would be measured at a distance of 3 feet above the floor level. So habitable space is defined elsewhere it's defined in Chapter 26, and it includes any space in a dwelling unit or individual living unit except a bathroom, water closet compartment, laundry, pantry, foyer, or communicating corridor, closet, recreation room, private workshop or hobby room, storage space, and fallout or emergency shelter. So there are a lot of exclusions there, but I think that those exclusions plus the kitchen exclusion would kind of address some of the committee's concerns or concerns that were at least raised during the last work session about, is it realistic, for instance, that a certain temperature could be maintained when an oven is in use in a kitchen, or, bathrooms, for obvious reasons, are to maintain a consistent temperature.
Okay, so Circle 14, item 2. So this, just to state the obvious, there are many apartments around the county where there is no air conditioning provided. I don't know how many, I don't know if we know, but this will require, even if the lease says that it's the tenant's responsibility, or it's not the landlord's obligation, the landlord will have to provide a window unit, if I'm reading this correctly. And then the tenant will at that point then have the choice as to whether they want to use it. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's correct. So under these amendments, in the window unit scenario, someone would be able to just, turn off the air conditioning. The window unit merely would have to be capable of reaching a certain degree. There are other potential amendments in the packet that might address the issue of a more formal opt-out by the tenant if the tenant doesn't even want, does not, for whatever reason, does not want the window units in their apartment.
Okay. All right. So this, again, Circle 14 helps with the, so there's language that it just doesn't, give us the plain version of the first technical amendment.
Sure. So, this is just really the first technical amendments by the County Attorney's Office. Yeah. So they wanted it to be clear that, well, the purpose of this provision to begin with was just to say that this bill isn't affecting a lease of who has to pay for electricity. It doesn't affect those provisions of the lease. The county attorney preferred the wording that says instead of the subsection does not impair any provision of a lease, they wanted to change it to must not be construed to impair any provision in a lease. And the reason why you see it twice is that this language appears both in the heating section and in the new air conditioning section. So in order to be parallel and consistent, that's why we did it. That's why you see it twice.
So the plain version is if the lease says the tenant pays for the utilities, that this doesn't change that.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, got it?
Okay. So, and then the second set of amendments would do a couple of things, clarify how DHCA would be measuring the temperature 3 feet above the floor, and also, probably most importantly, make some delineations about which types of rooms are covered, which are not.
Great.
And I'm sorry, but I should have also mentioned on Circle 15, you'll see at the very top where you see the a subsection 3. That is an amendment that has been requested by DHCA simply to clarify, look, to the extent that there could be any potential conflicts between the fire safety code and this air conditioning requirement, the fire safety code has to prevail. So, for example, you have an air conditioning unit that's stuck in the only available window, that's not going to work because you have to have some form of egress.
Okay. And then you have on Circle 15 the notes, the committee might wish to change the time of year or add common areas, include kitchens or add bathrooms. In other words, the draft that we have does not include those. So if we wanted those, we would have to add them back, although I don't think we should.
Yeah, you don't, so the way, even with these amendments, the time of year would still be from May 1 to, or no, excuse me, I'm sorry, yeah. If you go back to 14,
It's habitable space, which
it's habitable space, correct.
already
Okay,
delineated
I thought that we
elsewhere.
had. It's a temperature.
Bring at the end, and then we'll come back to the.
Did I not put that in there?
Morning, Director.
Right, the time of year.
Oh, we'll get to that. We're going to get to that.
Okay.
We're going to come back, and now we're going to go through the packet
Okay.
item by item.
Great, I'm sorry.
Okay, let's go back through the packet item by item.
Okay, so the first issue, and we discussed this briefly, and there's some varying opinions were presented to the committee about required temperature. As written, the bill requires a temperature of 80 degrees Fahrenheit. DHCA proposed a slightly lower temperature of 78 degrees. The Montgomery County's Renter Alliance asked for 75 degrees. In terms of information the committee might wish to consider, 78 degrees is recommended by the U.S. Department of Energy and PEPCO in terms of where you might want to set your thermostat for, maximum efficiency. Other jurisdictions that have an air conditioning requirement for rental properties tend to have a higher threshold, like, even up to, let's see, at the 82, 86 range. So
Phoenix has an air conditioning requirement, but the requirement is just that it take the living space to 82 degrees. That's what you're saying?
correct.
All right. Dallas has 85? It's hot in Texas. Wow.
It's more of a
To the
trial.
outside, that's nice, I guess.
It is a drier heat. What's that? Heat is heat. Heat is heat. 85 is uncomfortable no matter how you look at it.
The question is when you'd be out of compliance.
Right, so if you gave
Higher than.
If you gave 80, then there would be a little bit of a buffer, I would think, in terms of.
Well, look, I'm okay with 78 myself.
I think we should keep it at 80, but there's 2 votes for 78, so.
All right.
But I note that the bill was introduced as 80. We haven't seen any other it seems that other jurisdictions based on staff is higher than 80. We're going to be going lower than 80. I think if the fact that many organizations have said that 78 should be what people set their thermostat to not have any leeway above the 78 degrees, which is what is the recommended setting level, where you'd be out of compliance if you're 1 degree or 2 degrees above that. I think there should be some room for maneuvering there, so to speak, if the temperature changes slightly. So that's why I come down where I would come
Yes,
down.
DHCA, why are you recommending 78? Morning, Rosie.
Hi, good morning.
Can you please
80's
bring
just,
your...
Rosie McCray Moody, landlord tenant affairs. 80's just hot.
80's hot.
So it's just a personal thing.
It's not based
Do you
on
have
New
any
Jersey,
concerns about what?
Pepco recommends 78, and 78 is about as low as you can set your temperature without it being kind of uncomfortable. So, 78, 80,
The bill,
it says 78,
the sponsor has,
80 is
80.
This would be to lower it to 78. I would keep it as the sponsors introduced.
he's not here, and I tend to think that it looks like if, I don't know, other jurisdictions, we just have a couple here, we'd still be much lower than others at the point where you're non-compliant. It is a different standard to set it at recommending setting it at 78 versus requiring compliance at 80. I'm fine to go with 70. I was hoping for a little better answer than it's hot, but but
The Renters Alliance is recommending 75, which I think is unreasonable.
right,
And,
kind of in the middle.
yeah, so,
But let's talk about the practical
Right.
situation, Will this require a 78-degree reading in all habitable space unless the tenant is responsible for their own control? And if so, do you feel like that is a reasonable requirement?
Asim Nigam, Director of DHCA. Based on what our inspectors have observed in the different units, they think that 78 is, should be comfortable versus 80. Now, in
I
terms
think we all
of,
know 78 is more comfortable than 80. I think the question is it, are you, we are assuming you're confident that this is practical. This can be done. This won't create enforcement problems for you constantly having to be called out because it's 78.5. Is that something you're standing behind?
well, we actually monitor heating temperature as well. So the way we do it is 3 feet above the floor level. So we are following the same methodology over here for habitable areas. So if for heating is 68, someone can say, well, if 68 is 67.5, then it's the same issue that we'll deal with over here, whether it's 78 or 80 degrees.
Yeah, no, understood. But there's a practicality issue. Is it for some reason, is it more realistic that buildings will be heated to 65 than that they can be cooled to 78 under particular circumstances or anything like that? Or do you feel like this is pretty much apples to apples?
There could be an issue with some of these older buildings and the 78 degrees with the different types of windows that are out there. They may not cool down as reasonable as a normal unit would heat up.
Yeah.
So the 78 might be, reasonable. This will be on a complaint basis, only. We'd have to do some investigation into it, different times. I mean, with the heat, we can pretty much go in and see, okay, it's there. It's going to take a lot longer to cool down, so it may extend some of our times out a little bit doing some of these investigations as far as the temperatures themselves.
I mean, the department's gonna have to live with this, This is gonna be a significant requirement that you'll be in charge of enforcing. So we know that you know that, and we're assuming that you think this is workable.
I think it could be workable, yes.
Okay, well, I'm fine going with 78. One of the other reasons I should have mentioned this to my colleagues on the 80, when we get down the pike, the bathrooms and the kitchen. So Phoenix does cover them. I'd be willing to go a little higher if you give me the bathrooms and the kitchen. So, I just want to say that now, so we could, if we go 80 and we can include the bathrooms and the kitchen, I'd feel better about it. If we go 78, I think 78, from what you're saying, it sounds like it's enforceable, sounds like you're comfortable with it. I know heat stroke is an issue for people indoors, and, so if you think you can enforce it and it's reasonable, I'm fine going with 78, but I just want to mention my colleagues the other issues.
Well, that's an interesting offer. Not sure what I think of that. Let's talk about the practical issues again. I mean, older building, doesn't have central air. Probably has some window units. May not have them in every window, in every room. Not in every window, but may not have them covering every room today. That landlord will have to install units covering every room, and those units will have to be capable, if the lease says the tenant is responsible for utilities, those units will have to be capable of lowering the temperature to 78 degrees. That doesn't seem that difficult unless you have a building where for some reason the window isn't usable for that purpose. There's no window that you can put a unit in. Do we have any kind of waiver built into this at all? If DHCA determines that there is no window that can be used?
The fire code thing.
Yeah, the fire code thing on Circle 15, I believe it was. One of the problems we're going to run into.
Wait. Well, don't move on to another topic unless you're going to answer this topic.
Circle 15,
Yeah.
If it doesn't meet the requirements under a permit for fire safety requirements. Some properties down in Tacoma Park have, some of the apartment complexes, the 4 to 6 plexes.
Yeah.
They may only have one window in the bedroom. They may have, it may be a 2-bedroom unit. One of the bedrooms only has one window. That one window would not be able to put in a window air conditioner.
Right.
So they'd have to put in unit into the living room and or the bedroom that does have 2 windows, because you cannot block the egress.
Is that really the only condition under which you're aware that you can't install a window unit in a room? It's not something like older garden-style buildings also have that problem? Not to your knowledge? Okay.
Mainly the one bedroom, one window.
Go ahead.
What happens if the whole building's electricity, electrical footprint can't support a window unit in every single room of habitable space in the building? That it would blow all the fuses, so then they have to do would they have to do a complete upgrade? Is there a waiver process that they could say that the increase in rent would go up by X dollars, and that would be a question for the for the DHCA to decide what's in the public interest, or how would that work?
Yeah, window air conditioners require a dedicated circuit. So you'd have to get electrical permit and upgrade on many occasions your system.
Window
So this
units
could be
require
extremely
a
expensive.
dedicated circuit.
Could, in certain circumstances, in an older building where this is most likely to have the most impact, this could be an extremely expensive endeavor for everybody,
A lot of what they've
including
done,
the people who are renting.
they've upgraded the systems and ran conduit on the outside to that dedicated circuit for that window air conditioner.
That's what they do typically when they have when they need to install the units.
Correct.
They run the conduit on the outside.
Dedicated 20 amp circuit right to the window air conditioner itself.
So they'll have to do more of that.
More of that.
I mean, do you know, like in some of these older garden-style buildings, what share rooms have a window unit typically?
It's mainly in the older complexes down in Silver Spring, Tacoma Park, the 4, 6, 8 plexes, some of the properties down on Quebec Terrace, Ruatan, those types of.
I think we're all thinking about Quebec Terrace, but I was trying to also say, I don't want to like bias myself just by my experience seeing those buildings specifically, but you're pointing to them as well.
Same type of building, the older,
As we remember, we were there and there wasn't a window unit from every You could tell that, only a fraction of the building, of the rooms had a window unit.
We'll get to it later. I mean, I think that there needs to be some flexibility for DHCA for a waiver process in certain circumstances when the interest wouldn't be achieved, that you'd have to completely renovate the building. It would potentially take affordable
another
housing
dimension of
offline,
that
but
problem
I would, sorry.
Well, if you're in Tacoma Park, you're under rent control. And so, I don't know, maybe they have an exemption if you have to spend $30,000 or $40,000 to upgrade the electrical of your building. I don't know, do they?
Yeah, they have ways where you do improvements to your
Material
complex that they can recover the costs.
But it would raise the base. But the point that I was trying to make is, even in those circumstances, if the net impact would be people having to pay significantly more for housing, I think there should be some flexibility. I don't think the landlord should get to decide necessarily, but I think that DHCA should have some level of flexibility. But I know we have a waiver conversation in the lease, but maybe we can have that later in the conversation. I think on the 80, to Councilmember Joanda's point, it's hot and it's not comfortable is not a particularly compelling standard from DHCA. The bill was written as 80. We haven't seen, we don't have any information from any jurisdictions from staff saying that it should be, that others do it lower than 80. And if 78 is the temperature that is recommended from, on the energy side of things in terms of a consumption question, to have no leeway from what is recommended, to me, seems imprudent. So since that's the conversation that we're having now, I do think that, to have a bill written with a certain temperature in mind and to change it based on the fact that, it's hot or it's not hot, I mean, with all due respect, I just think that is not a compelling enough reason from a policy-making standpoint to change it and to not have any leeway.
It's either 78 or 80, so, I mean, we're not going to fall on our swords about it.
Right. Because, I mean, to me, the question here is supposed to be, it's really a good faith standard, right? Is the landlord in good faith providing a comfortable living environment for the tenant? I think that's a very important and legitimate reason for the legislation. But the 78, lowering it to 78 when 78 is the recommended with no leeway is not allowing good faith compliance, in my view.
Can I just say, your comment about no one's going to die, I think that's sort of the difference in a way, right? Is that 78 is like, it's Pepco trying to tell you this is the warmest setting that you can have and still expect to be comfortable, basically, right? That's sort of what this is about, is how to reduce energy by keeping your room at the very edge of not being cool, but not create problems for yourself. 80 is more about health. You see when you have heat waves, people die from excessive heat. You see this a lot in Europe, especially. I presume they prioritize affordability, over comfort, and you'll see people just dying all over the place from heat waves. It happens here in the U.S. too. That's about units that are 85 or 90 or 95 degrees, or even 100 degrees, right? So the 80 to me seems like it's a life safety protection more than a comfort protection, whereas the 78 is pushing down towards more about comfort and having people being able to live in some degree of comfort in their units. What we're exactly trying to get at here, I'm not 100% sure. Are we trying to ensure that people are safe, or are we trying to push further than that? It's a little tricky.
I mean, I think we are trying to accomplish a couple of things. One is people are safe. Second, people are comfortable. Based on what we hear from the utility companies, that temperature, level they set it, or they recommend for that matter, is based upon what it will take for our human body to function properly. Now, we can set any temperature we want. Now, in certain areas where there is dry heat, maybe a higher temperature is better. But in this area where there is so much of humidity, 80 seems to be uncomfortable.
I know personally I couldn't sleep in a room where the AC was set to 80. I couldn't sleep. It wouldn't work.
So that's why we are recommending 78.
But let's talk about the kitchens and bathrooms. Councilmember Joando asked about that. We've talked about it a fair amount. You can't put an air conditioning unit in a bathroom. I mean, almost under very few circumstances. And you probably won't. You can't put one in a kitchen because probably egress. You probably only have one window in a kitchen. So, I mean, I'll ask the council member, how do you envision this requirement working in rooms where there is no unit?
All right. Well, I appreciate it, and I think the primary point of this bill is, I believe, health and safety, right? And so that I think we want to err on that side, but that's comfort is a consideration. I noticed in here that Phoenix, for example, where it's much hotter than it is here, does require bathrooms to be included in their habitable space. And so, that's why I said I'd be willing, if we focus on health and safety, make it 80, then let's include that means your unit has to be, you have to have, again, and I want to bring up, it's not just the AC unit or the AC central air, whatever you have in the rental. It's also do you have proper ventilation? Are your fans working? There's other ways to lower the temperature in some of these other rooms that are not necessarily air conditioning related. I just want to restate that. So there could be other code issues connected to it. But, I'd be willing to give a little bit saying, okay, health and safety, because if it's 90 in your kitchen, that's not healthy either. And you should be able to cook a meal without passing out and dying in your kitchen, or your bathroom, because it gets too steamy. So I just think I'd be willing to give a little bit on that, but I think we should put them together. And the fact that Phoenix, and I was going to ask staff, I'm not sure if Dallas is in the same boat. I remember reading that Phoenix was, but where they cover bathrooms and or kitchens.
I think can I just comment while you look? I think it makes a big difference what the temperature is. When the temperature is 86, it may be that's no longer like if the whole house is cooling to some extent, or the whole unit is cooling somewhere, it's just going to carry over. But as we're saying, when you're at 78 or even possibly 80, it could become a difference. As a practical matter, I mean, you're not going to, when you walk into a house, if the oven is on,
Right, you're not going to.
you're not going to say that the reading, how would it work in reality if we were to include kitchens and bathrooms?
Well, we would, through the investigation, we would look to see, if the stove is on, if there's been any cooking going on, if someone recently took a shower, those types of things, and then compare it to the outside, right outside that area. So we'd have some type of, gauge to go with. A lot of times, like you're saying, the vents in the units do have to operate. That would be, the bathroom vents or bathroom windows or kitchen vents. So those are all part of code that we would look at also as far as any potential issues with those as well.
I see. So you would come in and you would test the surrounding rooms, and you'd say, clearly these rooms are up to code. They're able to hit the temp. So
Why this one is a little lower is probably because of X and Y.
Higher.
Yeah, higher.
so yeah, go ahead.
So, for kitchens and bathrooms, and you don't have a window for a window unit, and there isn't centralized air conditioning, which is what we're mostly talking about here, how do you comply? Now, I get the idea that if there's a oven recently, seems to have recently been on, somebody just cooked dinner, or somebody recently took a shower, it's obviously going to be hotter than what the standard temperature is. I, have respect for the hardworking men and women in the department who, have some level of discretion there to make that determination. But, just from a literal sense, if there is no window and the only option to heat or cool, or in this case cool, is a window unit, how does the building comply if we include rooms that are likely not to have a window?
Well, those doors leading into the bathroom would have to be left open to cool that area. if you notice that the door's always closed, then there's probably,
How is a landlord supposed to be in control of what doors the tenant leaves open and closed? So,
Well, I think that's where they get at. They say, we measure the surrounding rooms and they're working, so if the tenant just leaves the door open, there's no problem here. That's what I heard him say.
that's potentially what it is.
But how do you determine, I mean, this is a very specific standard, and you're asking for a very broad level of discretion. And so I just don't understand from a policymaking standpoint, if the goal is to provide great latitude for discretion for the department, which I would be fine with and comfortable with, then that's one way to write the bill. If the goal here is to have a very specific standard, which gives very little discretion to the department, then that's another standard. And I'm uncomfortable with a policymaking process where we write things very specifically and then say, but our goal is to give wide latitude and great discretion to the department. This isn't a good faith standard. This is a very specific mathematical calculation standard. 3 feet from the ground, 80 degrees, period. Or 3 feet from the ground, 78 degrees, period. There's no discretion there. I mean, I get on the margins, you can, wait to measure it, but if there's not a window unit, and the window unit is the only opportunity to cool, having, a much broader category of, well, if everybody's windows were kept open all day long, I mean, that's not a comfortable standard either. I just think that we don't have a very compelling case for compliance here, and I don't think we should set a standard where it's very difficult to comply.
Can I just offer a suggestion? I think what I'm hearing you say, and this is a suggestion to both sides here, we could put language that it's this standard, whatever, say it's 80, right? And for kitchens and bathrooms, obviously you have the discretion whether they've just been used. We could even add that, but outside of the room, right outside of the kitchen, right outside of the bathroom. You could add that in there, and that temperature needs to be read in normal circumstances. The other thing that I think we need to think about here too is, for these very small units where there's not these windows, there are different levels of BTUs on air conditioning units, window units, right? So, the $100 one is not going to get the same coverage as the $1,000 one, right? That can push a lot, could do a room, that's much larger. And I think the goal is, if you want to have the amount of air conditioning in the kitchen, for example, and or the bathroom, if the doors are open, normally kitchens don't have doors, where if no ovens are on, you can walk in the kitchen and you can take that temperature 3 feet from the ground and it's going to be 80 degrees. You want to be able to make sure that you have something that can push that air in there. And particularly for smaller units, I think that's achievable. So I would want you guys to comment on that, but as having lived in one of those little teeny units, if you have if you have this little small kitchen, you're going to have a window somewhere right in that little dinette area or nearby, and you want to have a strong enough BTU unit in there that it can get, when the kitchen's not in use, that you can get air into there. So you guys can comment on that, but my suggestion would be set the standard, and if we want to say when not in use, as it should be the same temperature in there, but if in use, you measure right outside the door or in the common area. We could put that in there, and I think it makes you get where you want to get. I don't know if you have.
Yeah, I mean, you are correct with the different BTUs and such like that, size-wise. Depending upon the size of the unit, you might need to have a higher BTU AC unit. So, yeah, we're fine with that.
I just think the important thing is that we say, if the kitchen's not in use, bathroom's not in use, it should be habitable in those rooms. I think we want to stick to that.
Do you think we need to say that, though?
Yeah,
Or
because it
can
contradicts
DHCA
the
just...
definition in the law of habitable space.
Well, no, what we're talking, Councilmember Juan is talking about adding kitchens and bath back.
Yeah, I want to,
I think the point, just to clarify, I mean, was the point that we have a standard in law about what habitable space is and what the expectations
they do include
are for what is provided for a habitable space, and whether that should be the standard or whether we should broaden that standard for this particular, I mean, I think that's a reasonable public policy question, but I just want to clarify what you were saying. I mean, I think, yeah, okay.
What is this habitable space? I remember you read this last time.
Yeah,
I
if you
think
wanted to go back to the kitchens and the baths. If you want to go back to the kitchens and the baths, then you would probably want to go to habitable rooms. So the habitable rooms are enclosed areas, living room, sleeping, cooking, and eating.
What are they doing?
Habitable room does not include. So that's kind of where you want to go
That
back
was
to.
kitchen, not bathroom, included in that. If you read that.
Living, sleeping, cooking, and eating is considered a habitable room.
But it doesn't include bathroom, you're correct.
Kitchen, not bathroom.
Right.
I've said what I feel. I mean, I think that the point here is supposed to be a good faith standard. I totally appreciate that. The idea that a place where you're, that you don't have the ability to comply, setting a compliance standard for rooms where you're likely not to have the opportunity to comply with it doesn't seem like good policy making to me. I would exclude them. I think that the goal here is to have a total unit that is able to be up to the health standards that we want. I think that's the goal here. I think, we're discussing this on the margins, which is helpful and healthy, and I think that's a good thing. But, my personal view is it's very hard to set a standard that's very difficult to comply with, and, I'd be more comfortable if we kept it as the staff recommendation on circle, 14 and 15.
You want to say that?
Sure, I think Councilmember Joando and I are feeling like 80 with habitable rooms strikes a good balance.
That would include kitchen, not bathrooms. Yeah, but it would be right outside the bathroom.
That's true.
Okay. The legislative process at work, here we are.
And I'm sorry, but just for the clarification, you're saying habitable rooms versus habitable space. And I know this might be more a question for DHCA, so I'm sorry, but my understanding was that DHCA wanted habitable space, but now you want habitable rooms. Is there a reason for the switch? I just want to make sure that I have it written correctly. Does it?
Sorry, can you ask that again?
What's?
difference between
I guess
habitable rooms
right.
and space.
Exactly.
You explain the difference between habitable rooms and habitable space.
The habitable space,
Can you tell us where they are in the code as well?
it's in the definition of habitable rooms and habitable space under 26.2 of the code.
Yeah, it's section 26 yes, 2.
Is that in the packet anywhere, or is that supplementary?
I'm sorry, I don't. I can read it for you if you'd like.
Yeah.
Okay, so
So habitable room is intended for use, living, sleeping, and cooking and eating. Habitable room does not include any bathroom, water closet, compartment, laundry, pantry, foyer, communicating corridor, closet, rec room, private workshop or hobby room, space, or fallout emergency shelter. So then habitable space is space in a dwelling, individual living unit, except a bathroom, water closet, compartment, laundry, pantry, foyer, communicating corridor, closet, rec room, private workshop, hobby room, storage space, or fallout emergency shelter.
Explain to me the
Literally
difference.
the same except for
So,
kitchen.
except for kitchen,
Kitchen's in both, it sounded like.
No, I mean bathroom, sorry. It's the same except for,
except for the bathroom.
no.
no, they both
They
have.
both have bathroom, only one has kitchen.
Yeah.
Bathroom.
So did habitable space include kitchens or not? Which is broader?
Space. We'll just go with space. Go with
Sorry.
space and add.
Could you tell us which ones have kitchen and bath?
Habitable room has cooking
So habitable room is kitchen.
and sleeping, living. It does not include bathroom and habitable room.
Okay,
Habitable space, except a bathroom.
not bathroom.
And so you want habitable room with a bathroom. So you want the living, sleeping, cooking.
Neither of them have kitchen.
So it sounds like habitable space is broader of a definition, no?
I think it would be broader because habitable room says it's enclosed.
Right.
So I don't,
I think habitable space is broader, and neither one includes bathrooms.
Yeah,
Add kitchen.
right.
it sounds to me, I mean, I'm a no on this provision, but I just want to clarify for the policymaking process. It sounds to me like they're virtually the same thing, except for instance, as Councilmember Joando noted earlier, I just want to clarify this to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying correctly. A kitchen, a cooking area that doesn't have a door is not an enclosed space. That's not a room. That's a habitable space, but not a habitable room. I think, to me, that is the difference based on the definition as you described it, because
Well, it says cooking area, though, that's the... thing, habitable room does say cooking area.
But it says enclosed, and so if it doesn't have a door, it's not enclosed.
So the intention is.
A lot of apartments, particularly smaller apartments, like ones that I've lived in previously, have a cooking area that I would call a kitchen, but it's not a room.
Did you ever go in there?
Yeah. There's an oven there. Apparently, it's used for cooking food. It was
storing dishes.
against the wall. I use it as a clock. I try to make sure that the clock was changed twice a year so that it was accurate. It didn't exhaust any heat, which was good. But is that I mean?
Well, I just think. Yeah, go ahead.
But I think we need to understand what the difference is.
Oh, I agree.
Enclosed versus unenclosed, to me, is the same. So I think the spirit of what my colleagues are trying to do is to include the cooking area that doesn't have a door, that is not necessarily enclosed. Is that accurate? Which would be space, not room. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, and again, I think the way you're reading it, it sounds like space is the broader definition,
That's what I'm trying to say.
which it covers more and would cover the kitchen. So I think we want space at 80.
Okay.
Is that right? You're nodding?
We'll take space at 80.
I think that makes the most sense to me.
Okay. All right. And if you find out something different between now and full council, let us know. But that sounds right, I think, Mr. Chair.
All right. I think we got it.
Trying to help.
All right. Is that 3-0?
2-1.
2-1. Okay.
But I'm happy to help.
Yeah, thank you.
So my colleague, Mr. Friesen, would have liked 80, not including cooking area.
Right.
Okay.
Good comment.
Let's continue.
So, great. So the next issue is the time of year. As written, the bill applies from May 1 through September 30th. AOBA had suggested changing the period so that it would be from May 15th through September 30th. The Renters Alliance recommended removing any time period altogether. And this issue really dovetails with number 5 as well, the maintenance period, because AOBA also had suggested, in addition to changing it from May 15 through September 30th, had suggested that for systems that are incapable of doing both AC and heating, in other words, where the landlord has to switch it over from heating to AC, that the time period should be June 1 through the end of September. Again, for what it's worth, I would think having one standard might be easier for DHCA's enforcement period. So whether that, whichever date that starts at, I think based on looking at just NOAA websites on temperatures of the last decade or so in Maryland, it seemed to me that May 15th might be a reasonable date just because there are parts of May for which you may want heating, so the extent that you have to switch over, you might want to split the difference. I don't know if DHCA has any particular recommendations.
We would recommend one time period, and that to be May 15th through September 30th. And in terms of the two-pipe system, based on our discussion with some property owners, it doesn't take 2 weeks to switch over from heating to cooling. It takes only a couple of days. So we would like to keep the same time period, for the two-pipe systems.
Okay, but this one concerns me a little bit, just having been seen the two-pipe system issue from a parent perspective in the schools. And nobody has, nobody holds closer the goal of keeping people comfortable than the school system trying to provide for a good living environment. And sometimes they get it wrong. Sometimes they switch from cooling to heating too early, and then the weather doesn't play out the way they expected, and they can't cool the building down, and everybody gets really mad. This happened about 2 years ago, as I recall. I think everyone was rightfully upset, but at the same time, it was a very honest attempt. I mean, it wasn't like they were being negligent. They just simply didn't get it right with how the weather pattern was going to play out that month. It doesn't feel right to me that a building owner or many building owners across the county would then be subject to fines and penalties for making a good faith effort. I think we're going after negligence and, lack of responsibility. So how that difference of 3 days, well, those are 3 days, I'm just concerned about being too strict here, and then as a result, setting up a situation where, even when you're trying to get it right, you just can't. It's not your fault. The weather is not, nobody controls the weather. I don't know. I was fine with June 1st. I mean, I recognize it might mean a few days. Every year there's going to be a few days where, who knows? Maybe every couple of years there's a few days where the systems aren't perfect the way we would wish that they were. But we're getting it through what we really know is the heat of summer, which is June through September.
And those types of complaints come in regularly for heat at the changeover month.
So how do you deal with that then?
We just go out and see what the weather's going to be looking like for the next period of time, next week or so.
Yeah.
We talk to management to see what their plan is as far as changing over. When you have specific dates in here, with the weather changing as much as it is, that's where it gets tricky.
So you have situations now where, well, what's the date for when you have to switch it over now?
There is no date for switchover.
There is no date for switchover.
No date.
So the difference is now you can go out and you can say, hey, you're not, let's look at the weather. Come on, switch it on. But you don't, there wasn't a situation where that person, that owner was in violation. You're using your enforcement to
We encourage them to move.
encourage them to move faster.
And a lot of times too, just like the schools, you really can't, a lot of these larger systems, you can't just shut it down, turn it back on. It's not like your single family home where you can switch the AC on and off. It's a couple of days, especially if you got an 8, 10, 12-story building. It takes a couple of days for it to either cool or heat.
And as we saw, yesterday it was almost 80 degrees, October 27th.
We've had blizzards in late March.
And we've had blizzards in late March. So, what is the owner supposed to do, I just don't see how, I'm just worried about widespread violations.
Yeah, I think he was first, but
Okay.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I think I just go back to the fact that our goal here is health and safety. I think we're all in agreement with that overarching goal. The question is good faith versus not good faith. I mean, that is really supposed to be at least my vision of what this legislation is intending to do. It's to make sure that we are targeting those who are not operating in good faith to provide reasonable living conditions for our residents that we would expect, that ensures that they're healthy and safe, but not to go after somebody who, is trying to do the right thing, but has to make this difficult judgment call at a transition time of year. It's not a perfect system. So I agree. I would be more comfortable with June 1st if we had to pick one date. I think that's what the intention here is, and I think the overarching goal really should just be, good faith. How do we ensure those who are operating in good faith can operate in good faith, and how do we provide the department with the ability to push those who are not?
And I just wanted to ask a couple questions. May 15th, the desire to keep that date standard, to have that date, what was your opinion on that again, and why that date? Can you just say, and I know you said one of the components was you spoke to two-pipe system folks, and it only takes actually a couple days.
Correct.
But what was your desire for as far as related to temperature, keeping it on May 15th?
Well, it's hard to predict what the temperature will be, in any given year, but based on what we have seen in terms of the average temperature, we believe that May 15th is a reasonable date for the switchover from heating to air conditioning.
And currently there's no standard. So
Correct.
And as far as the complaints you get, when do those typically start picking up? It's too hot in my unit.
The standard we have right now is if you have AC, it has to operate. That's the current standard.
Right.
Where we fall into problems is, right when that weather changes, the May, sometimes we've had some issues back into April. And then we've had some go into, mid to late October.
Right.
So there's a big window there that, is of concern.
So is there some way to provide you with the to set a date, whether it's May 15th or say it's May 15th, and provide some flexibility for the two-pipe systems, even if it is, a grace period of a number of 5 days, for example, or something? If that's the concern, that's one issue. The other is, how hot do we think it's going to be? And that's and I think the point of pushing it back, the original bill had May 1st, right? And some of the reasons stated by the sponsor, which I think are on point, is that things are getting hotter, not cooler, right? I mean, climate change is happening. We're in the middle of a climate emergency. We've passed a resolution. We're taking all these steps. So I think 15th sounds reasonable to me, in that it's 15 days after the initial bill, realizing where the trend line is going up. I know there were some 80-degree May days this year. So I just, I'm sensitive to the ability to switch over in the schools. So is there a way that there could be a waiver process if, say there's 2 or 3 80-some plus days on May 16th, 17th, and 18th, and you give and you start getting complaints, but there's a grace period built in for those two pipes to switch over. Is that something? You have a mic, so why don't you just press that one right there?
Okay.
There you go.
I think it would make sense to put a caveat on the bill. If you pick May the 15th, saying weather permitting or something, there should be something. Or say on or before June 1st, depending on the weather. Because I agree, you can't tell.
Yeah, I don't know.
You don't know when it's going to get hot.
Or if the weather over the next
There ought to be
week,
something in there.
if the weather over the next week is going to exceed 85 to 90 degrees,
based on
current forecast, we may be able to waive it one way or the other. Or
That's what I'm saying. I just want to flag you the flexibility. If it's going to be 90 degrees from May 15th on, which is possible,
It could also be 50 degrees.
it could.
That's the problem.
It could.
be in 50s overnight.
Yeah.
So
I mean, again,
That's heading up.
currently.
Yeah, that's heading up.
It's below the.
So I mean,
If you want to think of language that says if the weather is predicted to be 90 degrees for 3 days in a row in the week, in the following week, then you must that could be. I'm also just thinking about enforcement, right, and having to respond to complaints and life safety. The fact is, if it does happen in May, it's going to be an episode, whereas after June, it's every day. And I think we're really trying to focus here on ensuring that people have a safe place to live and trying to have a manageable system
no, I get that. I mean,
as well.
I agree.
That's all.
The bill had a month before. I mean, I think trying to be in the middle of that is pretty reasonable. We're going 30 whole days, but hey, look, I'm just saying, I think there should be an on-ramp. You were going to say something, Christine, about the possibility of that, or no? Okay.
No, I was going to say the possibility of just removing the time of year altogether. So then, because
Related to
then the heating requirement and air conditioning requirement might essentially balance each other out, because the landlord would be sort of dealing with both of those requirements and have to sort of come to the medium depending on the weather.
Are you aware of any? Would that be workable? That's an interesting idea. Because you're now that we're putting the back end requirement on the we have the heating requirement already.
Right.
Now we're adding the air conditioning requirement. So it's really a continuum. You don't want it to go above 80 degrees, really at any point. And you don't want it to go below, 60, 68 at any point. And so could you create a continuum where it's not based on the time of year, but it's based on those two standards.
I think we'd also use the, the forecast, extended forecast, what that would look like over the next few days. If it's going to be up in the 90s, then, and we're having people calling in about complaints about this, then yes, we would definitely talk to management and say something needs to be done here sooner rather than later. So regardless of the date and time, we would have that standard one way or the other.
I think we ought to just do June 1st and keep it clean, keep it administratable, help people understand when they really should use their advocacy and when they should just wait a day or two. All right, moving on. If you want to, yeah.
2-1.
2-1. Okay, opting out.
Right, so during the last work session, some discussion was given, and the committee also received some correspondence regarding the ability of landlords and/or tenants to opt out of the air conditioning requirement. And in particular, some concern was voiced during the last committee work session that you might very well have individuals who, maybe they're in an older house and they appreciate having the lower rent versus having an air conditioning, a window unit forced upon them. So there might be scenarios in which a tenant wants to opt out of a window unit. So there is on page 5 of the memo, a potential amendment should the committee wish to allow tenants to opt out. There's a proposed amendment.
Thank you. So you prepared language that explained, like, if you want to do it, this is what it might look like. I'm really struggling with this one. I mean, it seems to me every landlord who doesn't provide it would then just put this into your lease, mandating you to opt out. I mean, if you want to sign the lease here, you opt out. That's basically the rule. How does this do anything to bring air conditioning where it's not presently provided?
I think in those small plexes down county, a lot of them have window units, and during AC season, they charge an extra, it's about $250 for the season, for you to plug it in and use it, because it has a separate plug. And you can either pay it or not. That way I can see you opting out, saying I'm not gonna pay the $250, and then you just don't plug your air in.
Okay, wait, let me make sure I understand this, because this seems like an important point. So, but how is that different from tenant is responsible for, in this case, it's the owner is saying, if you want to run it, you're going to pay $250 a month regardless of your actual usage.
Or $250 for the season.
Or $250, okay, sorry, for the season. That's quite a big difference. $250 for the season. And then I'll, as the owner, I will handle the billing. They may not have the ability to parse the bill.
Because these are little old buildings, those are.
Yeah.
They're not individually metered.
They're not metered,
That's the
so
issue.
that's the issue.
Yeah.
Okay, so, yeah.
I totally understand what you're saying. Where I'm confused is, I think there should be an opt-out. I think the idea is to give the tenant the strength here, right? That's the whole purpose of the bill, and I think part of that strength should be making a decision. And as long as the landlord can't require opt-out, which by definition wouldn't be opt-out, so I see no problem, and in fact, I see a benefit to the tenant, because there are circumstances where you might decide that you'd rather not pay that $250, and particularly because we can't control the amount charged and aren't controlling the amount charged. That provides the tenant with some level of flexibility. So, I think the opt-out makes sense.
I understand that in the small plexes, but I'm not sure how that would work in any other type of building.
It would have to be on something that the tenant has control over. So these larger buildings, they wouldn't be able to opt out of those that currently have the central air. There's no way for them to be able to opt out of those because the building is providing everything.
Right, I understand that, but to allow the option of an opt-out in a lease,
Yeah.
what is the problem with that? You can't allow an opt-out in a lease in the larger building, as you're
I
saying.
was just explaining.
No, I'm asking it's not practicable for an opt-out in a building where you can't choose. But in a building where you can choose, it is practicable. And in fact, we're aware of buildings that currently, as you mentioned, have that provision. Why would we be taking away some flexibility that the tenants currently have in those circumstances in legislation that is attempting to help the tenants? I mean, to me, that I don't know what I'm missing here, but the goal should be to provide strength to the tenant, and that would be taking away the option from the tenant.
So I actually couldn't disagree more on this point. I think the goal of this bill is to protect the health and safety of tenants. And so what we're basically saying, if we provide an opt-out, is that the lowest income residents, who are the people who are going to have the air conditioning window units in these small plexes, and who might want to make a decision financially, not because they want to protect their health and safety, but just because they can't afford it, to opt out of this and put their health and safety at risk. They're not. That's what we called an untenable decision or a coerced decision. They don't want to make that decision. They're making it because they feel like they can't afford it. And so I think the onus should be on the landlord to provide this level of air conditioning, and there should be no opt-out, because we said at the beginning, this is a health and safety bill. You can't opt out of health and safety. It should never be 90 plus degrees in your unit. And even if you choose to opt out of that, you're putting your own health and safety at risk because you might be low income or poor. And so I just think we should not go down this road. If we want to talk separately about should there be rent requirements, I know there's people,
That's my next question.
That's a different conversation. But if this is a health and safety bill, it's under no circumstances, even if you choose to put your health and safety at risk, we shouldn't put you in that position to be able to do that.
Okay, I need to understand this a little bit more here. So this seems like it's not an issue when the unit is individually metered, because under those circumstances, the tenant has the choice to turn it down or turn it up. And this is only an issue where there's no individual meter. Is that correct?
Basically, yes.
And so under those circumstances, which is also probably your older, more affordable units, right? I mean, I imagine there are older, affordable units that are also individually metered somehow. I'm not sure if I know how they would have.
Most of the really old, the older buildings that are not individually metered have the window units, and those are the ones those little 4 and 6 plexes are the ones that charge you that extra money to use the AC for the season. That's the ones we're talking about.
And okay, is there a way to only apply this to specific types of buildings? I mean, again, if there is a general,
They can't charge.
What's that?
You could do that, or tell them they can't charge the $250 for the season, since it's a requirement that they have, that they provide.
Well, they will bake it into the rent. And what'll happen with that is it'll socialize the cost of that across all the tenants. And everyone will pay, the landlord will probably take a little piece of that, and the tenants will take a piece. And now everyone's going to just use AC all summer because now it's socialized.
But it would provide it would provide the desired thing, which is to provide everybody with AC, the option to have it.
But because I'm concerned again, maybe I'm misreading this, but that if broadly speaking, landlords are allowed to, or if the tenants are allowed to opt out, that'll be part of the lease. This is an opt-out room, and would that be illegal? Would you not? Would a landlord not be able to rent a unit as an opt-out unit? Am I not thinking this through precisely?
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
oh, sorry. I just wanted to clarify in terms of the potential amendment. So it would apply only in rental housing that has an individual air conditioning unit. And I don't know, I would defer to DHCA in terms of whether we would want to add, controlled by the tenant there. And then in terms of trying to mitigate some of the coercion concerns, although this is obviously your policy decision of whether it does that, but it would have to be provided in the lease. The lease would have to specify the additional amount of rent that would be required if air conditioning were installed. There would have to be an acknowledgement in the lease that the tenant had been offered but elected not to have the air conditioning, and the tenant would have to be notified that they have the right to file a complaint with landlord-tenant affairs.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I totally appreciate where Councilmember Jawando is coming from. I guess my slight philosophical disagreement is in the two different units that we're talking about. One is tenant controlled and one is not. The ones that are not tend to be the lower cost and therefore lower income units. And the idea that those tenants wouldn't have any control over how much they pay and how much air conditioning they use, and somebody who's in another unit does, they can choose whether to turn it on or not turn it on, what to set the temperature to. The landlord is only responsible for making sure that it works. And then it's up to them to determine how much it's going to cost them in terms of their utility bill. That, to me, is the difference here. And so we have a circumstance where we're not providing them any flexibility at all that is provided just by logistics and by practicality to other people. And to me, that doesn't seem like the best possible outcome here. That's the philosophical disagreement. I totally understand where Councilmember Jawando is coming from on it. I agree with the overarching goal. It just seems to me that the units that you can control tend to be the higher units, and they are able to decide what the temperature is and how much they spend based on their utility bills. Am I not understanding this?
And I understand what Mr. Jawando is saying too, because if I'm poor and I have health issues, I may choose not to get the air, not because I don't need it. I do. I have high blood pressure and asthma and some other things, but I just don't have the extra $250 to pay for the season.
But if you don't
Is
have
that really the spirit of the bill?
Right, but if you don't have the extra $250 to pay for the air conditioning, you might have the extra $250 to pay for the rent that is now going to be charged, and now
But
you can't
it's spread
afford.
out over 12
Now you can't afford to live there at all, and
But
that's
it's spread out over 12 months. I may be
all the
able to
residents.
pull that off.
Okay, I have another dilemma in this conversation. To me, this is a little bit like in a certain building. Like when you go out to dinner with your friends, you might as well order the steak. If you live in a 4 or 6 unit building that's not individually metered, you might as well run the air conditioning at 66 degrees, right? Because, and you will, because you don't pay the individual cost.
It's the tragedy of the commons.
It's a tragedy of the
economic
common. It's
theory.
a better, it's probably a better analogy.
Or the steak.
What happens under that circumstance? I mean, you could create a dynamic where
It raises everybody's
it
costs.
would have cost everybody $200 a year to have, 78 degrees, and now the landlord is basically getting hit with the equivalent of like $500 a year because everyone might as well just run it at 66, and so now that's going to get stuck into the rent, and like people aren't individually incentivized to save. That does seem like a little bit of a dilemma. I don't know what the answer is, but it does seem like a dilemma.
And I get it. I mean, I think the good news in that scenario, though, is everyone's alive. and we have the scenario where everyone has access to AC, and that assumes really the worst, that everyone is going to abuse it in that way. Obviously, it's market. The landlord can charge rent. We have no rent control.
You tell me you don't fight with your spouse over the proper air conditioning?
No, well, of course we do. Of course. Well, that's why I meant everyone's alive, because hopefully the argument. But no, I just think, look, if that cost is going to get spread 4 to 6 unit, I think the goal here is to make sure that we're not putting people in a situation where they don't have access to this. And I think we just need to say everyone should have access to it. And if that cost goes up, we deal with it. They're going to have to deal with that as a community. Go ahead,
Yeah,
sir.
I think that's true, but I'm still just thinking about like, wow, so now this building owner knows that like the cost equation has just changed a lot, and the building owner has no control over the use of electricity, which is a pretty significant expense. That seems problematic. You're going to end up with some very irate landlords who are, you try to put clauses in there maybe, like you can't run the air conditioning, would you be allowed to do that?
Okay, but
You may
most-
not run the air conditioning lower than 76, and I'm gonna come in,
They've assumed, they've already assumed, I don't want to cut you off, Rosie, but if they're doing this, maybe this is the point you're going to make. They're charging people $250 already if they want to use it, and they're not saying you can't go below this or higher than this. So they baked into that cost.
that year, but next
Well,
year.
that year. I'm just saying, so they can do a similar calculation for the rent. I mean, I don't think it's that
Everyone
difficult.
can pay, okay, help me out here,
The
Director.
other thing is,
Don't help me out, but
just
whatever you have to
because,
say.
just because they charge you $250 for the season doesn't mean you're still not paying your own gas and electric. So you're still paying your electric bill. You're paying the extra $250 because you're going to run your air and your electric bill going to be high, but you're still paying your electric bill.
If it's, assuming it's individual,
Even if it's not individually metered.
How hard is
They
it to
can
get
pay their
individually metered? I mean, I guess that's the answer
I
for
have
that
no
building,
idea.
is for the building owner to just come out and set up a meter. What's the problem? Is that
It's
hard?
expensive
We-
on
we've-
an old building.
Chris Anderson from DHCA, we actually have looked at that in the past for under different circumstances many times, and it's very expensive to individually meter.
Like
To switch from a
like
master.
tens of thousands, or really to take like a 6-unit building and to individually meter?
Yes, yeah, we actually had a
You're
situation.
probably gonna have to bring up the whole electrical to code, and then you're gonna have to install sprinklers, and you might as well just
Right, and
walk away at that
there's
point.
a lot of fees and permits involved.
I think if we're concerned about the tragedy of the commons, we probably shouldn't go down this path. I mean, I think that is part of what is happening here, and that's pretty existential. I did want to just say one thing. Everybody's alive, which is the good news, but only for so long, because if everybody's blowing out their air conditioning at 62 degrees or whatever the case may be, eventually the planet's going to burn on fire, and we're all going to go down in flames with it. But I don't know of a way we resolve the issue beyond an opt-out in the lease that gives the tenant an opportunity not to participate. And I get that that is a legitimate, I was trying to explain before, where I come from, that, where I'm coming from on this, that somebody in a higher end unit has the choice of what to set their own unit at and what temperature to be, and they pay according to that. They have the power to do that, but we're taking that power away from certain tenants, which I'm a little bit uncomfortable with, though I do understand the idea of not wanting to put the tenant in an uncomfortable situation. It seems a little bit like we're telling people how much their housing should cost and what their housing should be, and there's a balance to that, and it's a difficult balance to figure. Sorry.
You can still turn your air up and down, right? I mean, within
But-
these units.
But the point is, and basic tenet of economic theory is tragedy of the like, if you're already paying for it and your costs are baked, then you're going to use it as much as possible. If your costs are not, and you are paying per your usage is going to coincide more along the lines of what you need. And so from an environmental standpoint, from a cost standpoint to the tenant, you will spend less. So the cost will be more. I mean, I think there's just no doubt to this. The cost will be more to renters as a result by requiring all renters to do this. Now, the question is whether we think that the costs going up for rental housing is appropriate to have the ability for all tenants, to make sure that all tenants have a temperature that we think is appropriate so that they're safe and that they're healthy. But I think, we have to have the conversation, the context, or we are causing rental housing to go up, period. I mean, that is a fact. The question is whether or not we think that that is the appropriate public policy outcome for something that we think is as important as safety and health, which is appropriate.
I think we're saying another way, a slightly more rosy way, pun intended, is that we're raising the quality of housing and making sure that there's not a standard and a substandard. But the other thing, Chairman Reamer was asking this question, and I think it's a good point. Couldn't the landlord put in the lease that you shouldn't run your AC above X, 78 degrees for these months, and if we notice the electric bill, we're going to know, because we're going to notice that the electric bill is going way up, and we can come in and test and see where you have it set. Would they be allowed to do that within the law construct that we've set up?
Nothing that prohibits them from doing it. I don't know how they would actually monitor such a thing, but
Right.
they didn't put it in there.
Yeah, I mean, they would have to prove,
It's set it so that it won't go.
yeah, or set it, yeah, have it set so that it goes to a certain, you can't put it below 76 or 74 or whatever, theoretically they could do
Director Nagam, you
that.
can.
Yeah, it will be very difficult to monitor. Couple of comments. When we're dealing with buildings which are mass metered, it's very difficult to control the utility expense. And that's very true whether you are in this area or any other area across the country. Because during winter time, and I've seen this in my, properties that I,
1 meter for the whole building.
yeah, yes, that, in the winter time, you're keeping a thermostat at 85 degrees and you're cracking open the window and the utilities expense goes up. And that's true for the owner to complain about the cost. That being said, what we are dealing with in terms of the housing stock over here is the naturally occurring affordable housing in the county. Yes, we do want tenants to be safe and healthy in their units. At the same time, we are also providing options to the tenant in case they're already rent burdened. And I'm not sure if $250 is the right benchmark. It may be true for certain properties. It could be $300 or $150. I do not know the answer to that question. We are simply providing an option to the tenant here by putting this language in, saying that, hey, you are ultimately deciding for your own health and safety. We are providing the amenities here. I mean, there's no way to tell that even if my unit is individually metered, I may decide to keep my thermostat at 85 degrees during cooling months because I don't want my air conditioning bill to go up much higher than what I'm expecting. So we are simply providing an option to the tenant in the lease. Now, it's debatable, whether or not the tenant should be exercising the option, or should we force the tenant to exercise this option that, yeah, you pay $250 or whatever that magic number is above their the actual rent that they're paying. So it's simply an option that we are providing to the tenant.
Okay. Okay, I think that satisfies me, but I want to just ask one clarification. So you're not concerned that in larger buildings that still have window units, that it will become a giant loophole? How does this not become a loophole?
Well, as I understand, in our bigger buildings, I mean, they have central AC. We are talking about the housing stock, which is like duplexes, triplexes, or fourplexes here.
Yeah, but also there are like Quebec Terrace has window units.
What's the loop?
What would be the loophole?
Yeah, I'm not understanding the loophole, Pete. Maybe I'm misunderstanding.
Maybe I'm misunderstanding.
Yeah.
The loophole would be that the tenant signs a lease and they have to opt out because that's what the terms of the lease are. They have to opt out of no?
It shouldn't be in the lease. If you want to have a separate process where a separate piece of paper where you can opt out for this and save the money, that's different. It should not be in the lease, is my view. You can have a separate process by which, if the tenant wants to.
An addendum to the lease,
Yeah.
everything should be like right there, but.
Okay, you're saying you can't require someone to opt out. Okay. That was
By
my-
definition, requiring somebody to opt out is not an opt-out. That's what I'm not understanding.
do that.
Opt means option. If the person is not given the option, by a requirement, by definition, does not allow an option, which would deny an opt-out. So
That we would enforce.
if this, and that would violate, even with an opt-out, that would violate the opt-out. So
you're confident they won't create a loophole then
DHCA is recommending this. I tend to go with the department. The goal here would be to provide an option to make sure that we're not denying, to the director's point, Mr. Nagam, which I think is a good point, is that we want to provide a full range of housing and as many options for tenants as possible, particularly at a time when so many are cost burdened. And to take away something that currently exists, that option that some have, it makes me uncomfortable. So I'm just putting out where I'm at, because we've talked about this for a while. I tend to go with DHCA, have an opt-out, make sure that there is language as recommended by DHCA as well that explains the rights of the tenant in that provision of the addendum.
But can we just confirm that it's not the lease itself, it's a addendum or a separate document? I just am uncomfortable with it. You have to sign this when you sign the lease.
Most people who have that as a requirement tell you if you want to use the AC, you have to pay this $250.
But that must be an addendum to the lease. I mean,
It is an addendum to the lease. It's not a separate transaction. It's part of the lease agreement.
That would be, that's a regulatory question, isn't it? Is that,
Well, no,
would that
it's
be
an
in the
addendum.
bill? No, I understand from a practice of how this would be implemented in reality. But from a bill standpoint of including in the legislation the opportunity for an opt-out, that we're basically legalizing an opt-out being able to happen. So we're not saying that it has to be in the lease, in the legislation. I mean, I think that's, which makes sense to me, to make sure that it's not in the lease.
How is this being presented? You know, the thing I worry about is, hey, if you want to use your air, you're going to have to pay this extra money. Otherwise, you can opt out and save the money. And you're a low-income resident, and you need to save money. Are we really giving the person a real choice? Is my concern.
what's your response to that? Because that's an important point.
If they really need the air, not really. If they, but it's a choice. It's, it's a choice. You have to make it. It's like, am I going to pay this $250 and feel good, or am I going to just tough it out for the next?
But it's not a
3 hot
feel-good
months.
standard. This is not a feel-good
I
standard.
understand what you're saying,
30-minute
and I don't disagree. I don't disagree with you.
Does DHCA support an opt-out? Do you support this? I'm a little unclear.
The packet seems to say that DHCA supports having an opt-out, and I think the director earlier, you were saying that why? Is that correct?
Correct. We
And
do support this opt-out.
And I agree with the department. Just to
Well, I'm here.
put where we're at.
I know you're the director, so you're saying can you address that point directly and not have Ms. Rosie address it? Are you not concerned about the elderly resident who is going to try to save the $250 and despite their health shouldn't do that? You're not. What do you say to that?
Well, of course he's concerned about the resident.
I know you're concerned about it, but that issue.
No, of course, the health and safety of the resident comes first. We are simply providing an option to the tenant. So
You're providing an option to some tenants, not every tenant, right? Because some the people who have the air in their building, the central air in their building, they're going to at least benefit from the central air in the building. They can choose to meet how high or low they want to go up, but they're going to use it. And I think it would be an option if it was set, if you couldn't set it below 80. That would be an option because the law says you're during June 1st through September 30th, in the habitable room space. Sorry, I'm trying to do all the things we did earlier. The law will say between June 1st and September 30th in habitable space, it cannot be hotter than 80 degrees, except if you're poor and you choose to not do it. It is a fair depiction because those are going to be folks who don't have a choice.
I don't think we are saying that if you are poor, then your health and safety is a secondary issue for us. What we are saying is it is a primary concern, but we are simply providing an option. Ultimately, as you mentioned, even if my unit is individually metered, I may decide to keep my temperature at 85 degrees, which may be detrimental to my health, even if whatever health options or conditions that I am having. So no one is controlling that from that point of
You
view.
made that decision not based on finances. You made it based on your own personal, and that's what I'm having.
No, but here too, but the person is making decisions based on their own individual scenario. We are simply providing an option here.
The key is that it's an option. The landlord may not require you to opt out.
You never have to. There's
But-
no,
Yes.
All I'm
Well,
saying.
landlords do things.
All I'm saying
So-
is that when it's presented to people, it's not going to be necessarily presented in a way that it looks like you have an option. But
Correct.
But,
That's my concern as well, is that you're given, but
read the recommendation that I was trying to talk about before, that the department has asked for, that I agree with, includes in it that they further suggest that the tenant be notified of an option to file a complaint with the Commission on Landlord-Tenant Affairs. Basically, that they understand what their rights are. An option, an opt-in, an option is not required. This is giving an option. You know, with all due respect to Councilmember Giuano, and I appreciate wholeheartedly where you're coming from, but the same argument for what you have said of, well, we're just saying that for poor people it doesn't matter, is to say, well, we think that those people should then decide to be homeless because they can't afford to make this financial choice. And that goes from being cost burden to being completely inaccessible and unaffordable. I wouldn't say that because I don't think that's a fair way to depict it, but that is the equivalent argument of what has been suggested here, that for poor people, we're coercing this supposed option, and for people who aren't as poor, we're allowing them to make their choice with them. The reality, as I was saying before, is most people who are living in newer buildings, many of those people are living in a unit where they can control the temperature, and they also are paying an individual meter. Therefore, they can control their costs. So they can make an individualized decision of what they're spending and how much they're spending on. What we're saying here is we're not allowing these folks to give the cost. So what this is essentially saying is many people who have means have a choice of what to spend and how much to spend on air conditioning, and those people who have less means and are in more difficult circumstances have no choice at all. And so I just want to...
They have no choice, but they're actually then put into a situation that incentivizes the highest cost.
Correct. So it literally will drive up the cost. So I don't think either viewpoint is an illegitimate viewpoint. I think they're both very legitimate viewpoints. I completely understand where Councilmember Giuano is coming from. I think it's unfair the way that it was characterized. So I just wanted to push back a little bit on that, although I do think that the viewpoint of, you know, if the goal here is to make sure that everybody lives in certain standards, should we just mandate it? And the question here is whether there should be a choice and some level of flexibility given the acute housing costs that we have or not. And I think that's a legitimate public policy decision, but I don't want to devolve the conversation into what we're, you know, forcing on poor people and what we're not, because I don't think that's a fair depiction of what the public policy conversation is.
Okay, wait. I don't understand the language that's been drafted here. In rental housing that has an individual air conditioning unit, the tenant may elect to have no unit installed. That seems to be contradictory a little bit. Like, in the housing that has the unit, you cannot have a unit. Is what we mean that in the housing that does not have individual metering? Isn't that the core issue?
I think that sentence is misleading.
Christine, can you help us out here?
Sure. And I did have DHCA review the language in advance. But yes, I think the chair is raising a very good point. I think that does need to be reworded. In rental housing that has, in rental housing in which air conditioning would be provided by an individual unit, trying to capture window units here. So,
why don't we, listen, I think just generally speaking, I want to, yes, I'll come to you after. Let's continue through the packet.
Okay.
I do want to get a chance to talk to the bill sponsor about this issue. So I think we can wrap up today when we get through the packet, and maybe we can get some revised language, and then we can come back very quickly for a final committee meeting and pass it. I would like to have something coming out of the committee that everyone feels good about, and we don't have to relitigate it to full council. Mr. Giuano.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that, and I appreciate my colleagues. I do think this is different, though. We're talking about cost and we're talking about health and safety. Those are two different things. And while everyone's rent burdened, it's expensive to live here. You know, that's why I think you know, things like rent stabilization in certain areas aren't crazy ideas. You know, Tacoma Park has it. There's pros and cons. We should have that discussion about cost. What are the ways? Are there guidelines? How do we keep costs down? But I do not think we should compromise on health and safety and put poor people in a position to have to make that compromise themselves. And having been a poor person in an apartment like this in Quebec Terrace, I know the decisions that people make. It's like saying, do you want health care or do you not want health care? How much do you want to pay for health care or not? It's the same choice. And it's not fair to put people in that decision. Cost is a problem. It's a problem for a lot of people, but let's have that cost discussion. And I think if you spread it across the unit, even if it is a 4 to 6 unit, it's going to be cheaper than not providing it at all. And if they have to bake it into the rent, they have to bake it into the rent. There are plenty of multifamilies that have no utilities baked into their rent, and they break that into the cost of doing business. But I just don't think it's a fair choice. So I appreciate the chair saying we're going to revisit it and look at some other options and come back to it.
All right. Let's move on to the next one.
So great. The next issue deals with clarification of landlord responsibility. The Montgomery Housing Partnership recommended that the bill clarify that landlords will not be held responsible if a tenant chooses not to avail themselves of the AC amenity. So this does have some ramifications with the issue that we just discussed, but I do think that MHP's fundamental point would be addressed by the clarifying amendments that are at 14 and 15, because it would be clear, you know,
That's
when the person has control over the unit versus when they don't, specifying that when you have control, the unit just needs to be capable of providing the 80 degrees. So I think that would allay MHP's concerns about the landlord responsibility.
Okay.
The next big issue is the treatment of single-family homes. There was some correspondence received by the committee regarding the difficulty and
Quick clarifying question.
costs.
Single-family home refers to townhomes as well as detached. There's no distinction there.
Yes,
That's-
both the same,
Thanks.
yes.
Sorry, Christine, interrupted you.
No
Go ahead.
problems, though that's a good question. And so, I mean, a couple of options the committee could consider would be, exempting single-family homes altogether. Another option might be to delay the effective date for single-family homes, to provide a phase-in.
I recommend we exempt
Or
single-family homes. I just don't think we want to get into that whole conversation. It is, having installed central air in homes that I've lived in, it's inordinately expensive. I just don't think we need to get into it personally, but.
Could we just at least ask DHCA what they think about this?
Sure.
I could imagine, it doesn't have to be central, it could be window units, but I'm just curious what your thoughts on this issue.
Well, we wanted single-family homes to be included, but we won't be opposed to the idea if the committee chooses to give them a year's extension after the law is implemented. And that goes to the idea, if someone is renting the basement, the health and safety issue that we're discussing for duplexes and triplexes for that matter. So as here is a single family home, it's an ADU, and the person has to be comfortable for health and safety point of view.
Yeah.
So it's the same argument over here. But
Agree.
But I feel like with a single-family home, the tenant can install a window unit. I mean, nothing's stopping anyone from doing that. I don't think the landlord would stop you. I just,
I guess it will depend where the window is. If there is a walkout basement and there's no other window, or maybe one window where the AC will be installed, and whether or not that landlord may allow window unit to be installed per se, or they may allow, if they have, more often than not, they will have central AC, but if it's an older home, so that's why we are saying, if the committee decides to give them an extension of 1 year.
Longer time. Could I just ask if Christine or anyone, I would assume that Dallas, other places you looked at require this for single-family homes as well. Do you know the answer to that?
I did not see any exemptions for them, but I could dig down a little further.
You didn't see any exemptions, but you could look into it.
Right, because I don't want to misspeak. I don't
Sure.
know the universe of them, if
Sure.
there are examples of that, but I did not see any.
Yeah, I would just think if you're the standard is if you're renting and you're in the business of providing rental housing, it should be safe. And I think, but I do agree with you. It's different a single-family home rental is different from a multifamily. The cost is different. It's on one person or set of people, so giving an extension seems reasonable to me of time, but
The reason why I don't think we need to do this is, first of all, I think it's very easy for landlords to say that the tenant's responsible for utilities. There's probably someone in the house all times who is actually paying that bill, and I think that they can manage this situation themselves in a way that is just much, they're much more empowered, I think. So I don't think we need to go there on this one. You know, we can monitor it as we go. This might be something where, 5 years from now, people feel like this was a miss, but I don't think that this was really an area of previously identified concern. So I'd recommend we just not intrude into this area.
I'd agree on not, on exempting single-family homes.
I would
All right, 2-1.
disagree on that.
2-1. All right. Maybe we have a 3-0 on exempting historic properties and farmhouses?
Yes.
Wanda?
DHCA is okay with that?
Well, if you're
If you
gonna,
sleep on a pile of hay, you must have,
yeah, if you're gonna exempt single-family homes, it's the same as a farmhouse and historic and everything else, so that'd be a combination from what I'm looking at.
Why would you exempt single?
we already did.
That's a good question, Rosie. It happened while you were at the bathroom, and I hope residents write in and ask the same question.
Okay, already done.
I know you do. That's okay. Yeah, I'm fine with the farmhouses. I don't think that that's an issue. Yeah.
All right. Ooh.
Moving on.
Ooh, there you go. Well done.
Nice.
One issue for consideration is properties that are slated for
Right.
redevelopment in the near future, and MHP had raised this issue. So one potential way to address it is the amendment that you see before you on page 6 to add some uncodified language that allows DHCA during a certain time period after the bill becomes effective to allow certain pending redevelopments to be exempt from the requirement.
That sounds fine to me. Any objection? Hearing none.
No.
All right, technical amendments.
Correct, and those are, the technical amendments are shown at the circles 14
All right, we already
15.
started with those at the beginning.
correct?
The one area I just think for my colleagues to reflect the one change, which it says excluding, does that need to be changed? The language that we talked about earlier?
Yes, there would be,
Habitable
yes,
space.
and in addition, the May 1 would be changed to June 1.
Right.
So there are those two changes, yeah, and there are two instances where you see habitable space and then excluding kitchens. So in both of those instances, excluding kitchens would be removed.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Reflects the prior discussion.
Okay. Good, so you'll work on some additional language around that one issue. Otherwise, I think we went through in a pretty thorough way, and we'll come back to that, and we'll schedule that for the next couple weeks, hopefully, and get this done. Thank you very much. All right, I think this is a good bill, by the way. I hope that was clear from the deliberation, but I'm pleased by this. I think it is something where it's long overdue. Are there any other items? No. Okay, we're done for the day. Thank you.
I don't know if it was your